start right now. Uh, so
I'm not talking with you.
so I think so. First of all, just so for those of you who don't know Liel, Liel is what do we call the extended part of the TVT family. Because she's the granddaughter of our very one and only Elaine Asaye. But it's not. But like while we're proud of Elaine, Liel is a formidable tour guide in her own right. We have shown a movie literally days before October 7th, a movie where Liel was a star of a movie about an experience on Birthright, where Liel was shown in action guiding and singing Olam Chesed Yibane, if I remember correctly. So Liel has already made an entrance, and a great entrance in our Israel education. And little did we know that a couple of days later, Liel's world and the world of all of us would change so fundamentally. So when we hosted you here, for High Holidays, little did we know, how much things will change in a couple of weeks. So I think I find it very moving. We're here exactly 6 months later today, and we're showing solidarity with Israel in this way. This is the last of our virtual tours, and I want to say, please God, we need to start planning a tour a solidarity tour in person soon. And
I'm going.
And when we do it, we'll do it. Of course, we're going to engage two of the best tour guides I know, which is of course Liel and my brother Jan. So we need to make it. We need to make it happen.
Wait a minute. There's also Dor. You can have three.
Free,
Oh, he's a tour guide too?
Yes,
Everybody is.
Everybody's out
Everybody
there.
Everybody's
Nobody's
doing it.
working.
So the three best tour guides we know here. So that is my that is the kavanah. Maybe we'll be able to see Israel soon. And
Wait, let Liel see who just walked in.
I see.
That's Liel's.
דיברתי עם ישראל, לכן אני מאחרת.
אנחנו בזמן ישראלי, אז בזמן, okay. So our kavanah, our intention is, may we all be able to go to Israel soon, and may we have besorot yoter tovot, better news coming from Israel. And Liel, before you also start touring us around, I want you to know that we have here 3 members of our confirmation class, and we have just spent an hour and a half, or discussing, the British mandate, and all of the Israel's different wars. So a part of Israel education, and also I want Elaine. This is something that is important. We want to have a little monument or to October 7th here at TVT on campus, and the idea was that it should be the youngest generation to design it. And actually, these 3 amazing young people have started the process of brainstorming how this memorial of October 7th should look like, and they will be responsible when it comes to idea ideation. They will not be the only ones putting it together, but they will be the ones who lead us on this. So I just want you to know that that we're in this place where it's an important part of who we are as TVT. And with this, I hand it over to you.
One statement. What is your first name?
Ari
Ari's brother Jacob Klatsker was taken by Liel on Birthright. So
it was a different trip, but yeah, we were together a few months ago in Israel.
Okay, that's it.
Yeah, he's awesome. Okay, are we good?
Yeah.
Okay. Hi everyone, I'm Liel. Think I've definitely met most of you, and everyone who I haven't met yet. Hi. So I was asked by Rabbi Mati to basically give you a virtual tour of the Galilee and Haifa as well. We only have an hour, so it's going to be a short snippet of a bunch of different pieces that I put together. We're going to talk mostly about history, with a very important question that sort of will guide us through. And the question is also, I think, a little bit relevant today as well. And then at the end, I'll talk about a little bit about Haifa, about modern Haifa and the Carmel where I live, just to give you a sense of kind of like what my life is like a little bit here. Hopefully we'll have time for that. So the question, before I open up my slideshow, is we all know, I think, I'm pretty sure, that the story goes that the Jews were kicked out of Israel, the land of Israel, after the destruction of the Second Temple, and didn't come back for 2,000 years, right? That's the story that we know. So in this tour, in this next hour, I'm going to challenge that, and we're going to explore how actually the Jewish community might have never actually left the land of Israel, which I think the reason why it's an important question and an important subject to talk about today is because I think in the sort of political or modern discourse, there's a lot of questions about where do Jews come from. And so hopefully what I'm about to take you through will help us sort of clarify some of the questions about history and some of sort of the stories that maybe are a little bit less familiar, maybe more familiar. So that's what we'll be doing today. Okay, I'm going to share my screen. Hang on. And then we'll start. Okay, let me know if it's working. Yeah, it's good, right? Okay. Okay, so we're gonna just start with the map of the Galilee. I'm assuming most of you have been to Israel at least once in your life, and hopefully, if you have, when you have, you visited the Galilee at least once or twice. So the Galilee is the northern part of Israel. Actually, the Galilee specifically is divided into a northern section and a southern section. So this area is the northern section, and it's separated by a valley right here around this area, and this is the southern section. It's in between the Mediterranean Sea, which is over here, you can see my mouse, right, and the Sea of Galilee on the right-hand side, so on the east. And Haifa is right here. This is the Carmel Mountain. Right down here is the Jezreel Valley, the valley that kind of like slopes down after Haifa. And up here is Akko. We're going to talk about Akko a little bit later. And what else do you need to know? Right here on the right-hand side, after the Sea of Galilee, is the Golan Heights. So that's just, we're not going to go into the Golan Heights, but important to know because I'll mention it a few times. And of course, this valley right here that kind of crosses through the Sea of Galilee is the Valley of Jordan, the Valley of Beit Shan. It has a few names depending on where you are. Okay, one important thing before we start that I think is really necessary to mention, especially when we're talking about the history of what happened in the Galilee, is this road right here, this road that I marked for you. It's called the Via Maris, which is sort of the path or the road of the water. And it goes along the water, and it goes all the way from basically Egypt all the way up to Damascus, and basically it was used for centuries as a trade route, a really, really important trade route. It was sort of the easiest way to get from the south to the north, basically crossing the land of Israel. And eventually it was actually formed as an official road by the Romans. That's why it still has the Roman name, the Via Maris, right, which is in Roman base, or in, yeah. Okay, so this is the Galilee, and we'll be basically kind of exploring different points in the northern region of Israel. And like I said, I'll be taking you through these 2,000 years that we, so to speak, were in exile, but also maybe not in exile, right? That's the focus of the tour. We're going to start in Jerusalem. So Jerusalem is not on the map, I'll just point that out, but I did make a slide for it. We're going to start in Jerusalem because I just want to make sure that we have a little bit of background before we start. So Jerusalem in 70 CE, just this is background for those of you who forgot or don't know, Jerusalem was destroyed by the Romans, and the Jews are basically exiled. Most of them go to Babylon, and there's a small community of people who actually go to the Emperor Vespasian, right, who's the Roman emperor at the time. The representative, his name is Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai, and he goes to Vespasian and he says, please let me have a small little community north of Jerusalem, right? It's called Yavne, and let me and the sum of my sages go there and live there, right? So this is sort of the story. I'm not going to get too deep into it, but he asks basically for three things. First, that the Romans will guarantee safety for all of the scholars, for all of these like Jewish rabbis who are going to move to Yavne. And he asks for guarantee of survival for Rabban Gamliel's family, who is a family of the descendants of the house of David, and also asks for physicians to restore the health of this very important rabbi, this important spiritual leader, Rabbi Tzadok. And at the end, Vespasian says, yes, okay, you can do this. This was it says at the bottom here, I'm going to read, and that was the beginning of the 2,000-year dislocation of the Jewish people and the Torah from their land. Although there never was a time that the land was totally empty of its Jewish sons and daughters. Okay, so this is an important beginning to our story, important to remember. So basically this really, really small group of people, these scholars, these rabbis, they go and they decide, well, they don't decide, but essentially what happens, and what they hope to happen is to create a portable Judaism. What does this mean? It means that their temple is no more. They understand and recognize that they don't have a central location to go and pray and to go and congregate and to go and worship. So they have to find an alternative. And the alternative is to take some of the themes, some of the traditions, and morph them into something that can be carried around. It could literally be portable Judaism. So they go to Yavne. Now I'm just going to show you a picture. If we were in Israel right now, I would probably take you to Yavne, if this was the theme of our trip. And this structure, this building, is actually probably Crusader with some Ottoman construction. But what some archaeologists, but mostly Jewish communities believe is that actually Rabban Gamliel, this is his grave. A lot of people believe that this is his grave, his tomb. And so that's why sort of it's become a holy site in Israel. So I would take you there if we were in Israel. But otherwise we have no remnants of this actual place called Yavne, in the sense of we don't actually specifically know where it exactly was. We just know that this group of rabbis went there and they got permission to go there. And they basically start this whole idea of portable Judaism. Now, after that, the next sort of, I guess we can call it evidence that we have of Jewish people in the land of Israel is in 135, 136. So it's 70 years after the destruction of the Second Temple. We have another revolt of a Jewish community, and this time it happens in the land of Judea, which means that not all the Jews have actually left Judea. Not all of the Jews have actually moved to the north or moved to Babylon. Some of them actually stayed in Judea and they have a revolt. Now, if you've been to Israel, you might remember crawling through some tunnels and caves. So these are called the Bar Kokhba caves. It's something that a lot of groups usually do when they're here. And these are the caves that basically all the Jewish members of the Bar Kokhba revolt hid out from the Romans and attacked the Romans basically from these caves that they constructed. And not only did they do that, but archaeologists have discovered coins that were actually coins that were in the process of being made to sort of establish a new Judean kingdom from the Bar Kokhba revolt. So not only is it like a group of Jewish people who were adamant about revolting against the Romans again, but they actually had this vision of creating a new Jewish dynasty, so much so that they even created coins to sort of make it real. Unfortunately, they did not succeed. But nevertheless, that is another piece of evidence that we have of Jewish presence. Okay, we did Jerusalem. Now, during the time of the Second Temple, this is kind of going a little bit off our path, but I think it's super important to mention. And if you were ever on any sort of Jewish group tour in Israel, you probably never went to the site, and it's not one that's so popular. It's one of my favorites personally because to me, it tells the full story of what was taking place during the first century, during the destruction of the Second Temple. It's a synagogue discovered in an ancient city called Magdala, and Magdala may ring a bell for you because there's a character that's very famous that we know of. Her name is Mary Magdalene, right, from the stories of Christianity in the New Testament. And she is supposedly from this town, and this town is where Jesus comes basically throughout the Galilee, and he's preaching and he's teaching to Jewish communities, because remember, he's Jewish and he's considered this like very renowned and well-known rabbi, to Jewish communities around the Galilee. And one of the places he goes is Magdala. And so what's so interesting and fascinating, in my opinion, about this site is that they actually find a synagogue from the time of the Second Temple period, which we don't really find so many synagogues because the Second Temple was everyone's synagogue. Why would you need a synagogue where you live? And this is one of the places where it's actually evident that they did have synagogues, they did have gathering places, even though they had a center in Jerusalem. So Jesus comes and he basically preaches and teaches in these spaces. And one of the really cool things you can see in this picture right over here is that there's this really cool stone that was found that if you look closely, you can see that there's a menorah and there's all kinds of other, there's pillars and there's jars, and it's basically symbolism of the temple. So people were already creating sort of symbolic facades, I guess I'll say, that were reminiscent of the temple even before the temple was destroyed, which means that there were artists who lived in the Galilee who went down to Judea to visit the temple, who remembered what the temple looked like, or remembered the different visual elements of the temple, and then went back home and then carved it out on stone or drew it or painted it or did something with mosaics, which I think is super fascinating because it tells us so much about kind of the communication between the different cities in the north and in Jerusalem, and also how kind of people were drawing on inspiration from the temple, but they also had their own thing going on up in the north. So I think that's really important to mention, just so we can understand how rich the communities already were up north. Okay. Magdala, by the way, is on the shores of the Sea of Galilee. So it's around Tiberias area, if you guys know where that is. Okay, so moving on, we have two really fascinating sites that there's so much to talk about. So I'm going to try to simplify it for us. Maybe some of you have been here because these sites are pretty popular. What happens is we have this, like we said, this whole group of scholars, this group of rabbis, where they're in Yavne, and they eventually actually move from Yavne to, you see, it says it in Hebrew, I apologize, but this is Jerusalem, and they move from here to Yavne because they get kicked out of Jerusalem, and then from Yavne they move all the way up to the north to a place called Usha, and from there they move again to a place called Shfaram. From there, they move again to a place called Bet She'arim, from there to a place called Tzipori, and then all the way to Tiberias, which you can see at the very last station is basically right on the Sea of Galilee. Okay, why do they move so much? Because the communities are moving, right? And they want to stay out of harm's way and all of the chaos of the Romans, right? They're trying to find a place where they can really settle and create a system for the Jewish community that exists and lives in its own right outside of the structure and the framework of Jerusalem, of the temple, of Judea, of the priests, right? So they move all the way up north, as you can see on this map. And one of the first places that they stop is called Beit She'arim, which is in Hebrew, the house of the gates. And so Beit She'arim, this, okay, Beit She'arim looks like this. Okay, let's get a little closer here. And basically, it was the center of the creation, the place where basically the Mishnah was created. So what's the Mishnah? The Mishnah is basically a codified version of what it means to be a Jew post-Second Temple life. So written down different scenarios of what to do if my neighbor's donkey gets lost, what to do if I find something that doesn't belong to me, or what to do if, in all these case scenarios, all these stories, like what does a Jewish person basically do in this time where there's a lot of question marks and there's a lot of confusion because the center was the temple, and it was very clear kind of how you worship and how you're a Jew. And this all of a sudden changed everything. So there was somebody called Rabbi Yehuda Hanassi, okay, and he was sort of the predecessor of Rabbi Gamliel. He was the predecessor of Rabbi Ben Zakkai, and he finally lands in Bet She'arim. And in Bet She'arim, he creates sort of like a yeshiva, like sort of like a study hall, right? He gathers the people, and this is one of the excavations that you can see. You know, kind of when we think about like prayer spaces or study spaces, it's a bunch of people sitting together and talking and discussing or learning from somebody who's giving them a lecture. And so it's kind of cool to see how even in archaeological findings, it's just a bunch of stairs and people came here to sit and gather and pray and talk and study and teach. So just like today. And so he does this and he creates the Mishnah. And what happened was in Bet She'arim, in this place, we find not only his tomb, but a whole system of catacombs underground. So something really fascinating about the geology in the area of Bet Sharim is that it's actually all chalk. And if it's all chalk, that means it's really easy to carve through, right? So what we find is, is various different images. For example, the menorah. So someone here, not only were people buried, but they actually carved out different symbols that again were reminiscent of what they once knew that was part of Judaism. Now you'll notice this picture is not so clear. It's a little blurry, I apologize. But you'll notice that this does not look like our Chanukiah from Hanukkah. It looks like the menorah because they didn't have a Chanukiah that they lit on Hanukkah. That wasn't a thing yet, right? So this is basically a replica from the menorah that was in the temple, not from the Chanukiah that we have today, right? Because it has less, has fewer places for candles. So this is also how we know that the people who were living in Bet Sharim, they clearly were at the temple. They clearly saw it. They knew what was going on. Okay, another really interesting thing that was actually drawn on the sarcophagi or carved out on the sarcophagi, right? Sarcophagi is basically the sort of cabinet that people's bodies are put in. So they look like weird monsters, but they're actually images, or meant to be images of lions, and lions represent Judah, right? The Lion of Judah. And so this is something that we're going to see again a little bit later on in a little bit of a more professional version, I would say. But this is the beginning of basically Jewish people sort of putting down their, like sort of copywriting different things, different symbolisms of who we are. Like think about today, right? The state of Israel, our symbol is the menorah, right? The symbol of Jerusalem is the Lion of Judah. So these are things that 2,000 years ago are already being sort of marked as Jewish symbols. Okay, one more thing I want to show you about Bet Sharim is that the reason we know the whole story, kind of who was here and what they were doing, is actually because right next to the tombs, on the wall were carved out or written Rabbi Shimon and also Rabbi Gamliel. So these two rabbis that we talked about, that we know from the story of Jerusalem, we know that they're here because their names are literally carved out. And it's very rare that we have that. Archaeologists, for example, today are dreaming about finding something like this for King David, for example. That's like one of the biggest dreams, to find some kind of carving out of this is where King David is buried. That would be fascinating. Or this is where Jesus was buried. That would be fascinating. So this is something that's really special in that regard. Okay, so next to Bet Sharim, very, very close, is another site called Sipori. And Sipori was basically, it was a Jewish town, but very quickly after it was a Jewish town, it sort of became a mixed town because the town sort of surrendered really early to the Romans. And it's, I think, one of the first examples that we have of like real multiculturalism. Or at least that's how we like to tell the story. We don't really know what was happening there exactly, but we do know that, that people lived side by side. Romans and later Byzantines, Christians, and Jewish people lived side by side in this town. And it was a really, really beautiful, big, and most likely quite wealthy town as well. So they lived a pretty good life, apparently. One of the reasons why we know that in Sipori there was a Jewish community is because we find a synagogue. Now the synagogue is weird. It's weird because on the floor of the synagogue, we have mosaics, which is not so weird, right? As you can see here, we have like a menorah symbol. Okay, pretty normal, not so crazy. We have menorah symbols on our in our synagogues as well. But we have here, sorry. No. Sorry, we have here something on the floor that we don't have in today's synagogues, which is a zodiac sign or zodiac wheel, I guess. And it symbolizes all the astronomical symbols for each month. And not only that, but in the center, it actually has the expression of a god, and not just any god, but the god of the sun. Which, if we know anything about Judaism or anything about kind of what's written in the Torah or what God tells us not to do, is to not worship any other gods and not have any other gods besides me, and don't make an image up, like don't make an image in your holy spaces or at all. So the question is if this is a synagogue, which it is, we know that it is, why in the world on the floor of the synagogue are these images of sun gods and zodiac signs and all of these things that seem so pagan and very, very not Jewish? And so there's no answer for it. It's a really, really kind of cool question that a lot of historians ask themselves. But one of the thoughts perhaps is that the communities in the Galilee were really, really influenced, especially the ones who lived close to Christian communities, were very influenced by their neighbors. And they wanted to sort of be like them. And so maybe that's why. Okay, so we're moving on from here to Tiberias. So like I told you before, there was a few different stations of the Sanhedrin, basically the group of people that created the Mishnah and created the Talmud, and then eventually became a very popular functioning system for the entire Jewish community that was living in the land of Israel at the time. And so not only did they now have rules, right? In the Mishnah, there was now rules of what to do or what to not do, right? Without the guidance of the priests at the temple in Jerusalem. But now you actually had a judicial system set up. So let's say you did break a rule. Now you had someone to go to, which was the Sanhedrin, sort of like the courts. You had someone to go to basically decide what was going to happen to you, what was going to happen to the other person. And the community basically continued on like that. So Tiberias, we're talking the 2nd century, between the 2nd century and 5th century, basically. It's a period where, like I said, the Mishnah and the Talmud were being written. And the reason why Tiberias is such an important, or one of the reasons why Tiberias is such an important site is because it's on the water, right? It's on the Kinneret. And what happened was in Tiberias, in the city of Tiberias, if you've been there are hot springs, really, really cool hot springs. And the sulfur in the water is known, and at the time was known internationally, or at least regionally, internationally, it was known to heal your skin and heal various different kinds of muscle issues and skin problems that people had. And so people would actually come from outside of the land of Israel, coming in to come specifically to Tiberias to get treated. And when you have something like that, you're bound to be influenced by outside people, right? And so again, in the Galilee, especially if you're living in Tiberias, not only are you exposed to the Christian communities that are with you there, but also international people who are coming in. So it's even more so, you're even more kind of worldly than you would be if you were just like living in Judea or living in Jerusalem alongside all of your Jewish sisters and brothers. So in Tiberias, right next to the water, like literally just across the street from the water, we have another synagogue that's even more detailed than the floor of the mosaics that I showed you before. We have this image that comes from that floor, which is all symbolisms of the temple, the menorah, and you can see the shofar, and you could even see here there's a lulav and an etrog, what we shake and use for Sukkot. So all of these symbols are, again, the Jewish communities were bringing back these symbols from the temple and trying to sort of keep them alive. And actually, pretty much every single synagogue after the destruction of the Second Temple, that all of the Galilee synagogues and even the Golan synagogues, they all have in some way, shape, or form these symbols. It's really fascinating to think about about how critical it was for them to keep these things alive and keep these memories alive and keep these symbols alive, even if it meant doing things that maybe were a little bit against the law, right? Because again, you're not really allowed to bring all these things into your holy space. Okay, I'll just show you another picture. This is another example of the Helios god, right? The sun god. So this is a very clear vision of someone's face who is, a god that is not, is literally not allowed in Judaism. So again, this question of how did they do this? Why did they do this? And this is another piece of the mosaic, which it's not going to be familiar to you, but in a minute it will be familiar to you, and I'll explain to you why. Because in today's synagogue, when someone wants to donate money because they want their name to be on the bima, or they want their name to be memorialized for a specific room in the synagogue. So this is the ancient version of that. They would put on the floor all the names of the people who donated to the synagogue, and therefore they would be remembered there forever. And everyone knew kind of who was important in the community, if you know what I mean. Okay. One more thing about Tiberius that I'll just share is that a few centuries later, we're talking 15th century, there was a woman, her name was Donna Grazia, maybe you've heard of her. She was a Jewish woman, and she came from Portugal initially, through Belgium, through Italy, and then eventually to the land of Israel. She was a very wealthy woman. She came from a very wealthy family, and her husband died, so she got all the money. And one of the things that she decided to do was invest a ton of money during the Ottoman Empire to Jews in the land of Israel so that more Jews would be able to move. So she actually ended up paying for a lot of the ground in the city of Tiberias so that Jews can really, so even more people could move there. It was already a Jewish center because the Sanhedrin was there, right? The Jewish court system was there, but she wanted to make it grow even more so. And then she also gave money to a city called Tzfat, which I'm sure most of you have been to Tzfat if you've been to Israel. And if you've ever heard a tour guide tell you about the 4 holy cities of Israel, Tiberias is one of them, and Tzfat is another one of them. And primarily Tzfat is another one of them, also because of its mystical, spiritual, historic stories, but also because Donna Grazia gave a lot of money to the city to help the Jews be able to move there. So therefore, our next stop is in fact Tzfat. So we're going to go a little bit up north. And Tzfat, so it has Tzfat, if you've ever been to Tzfat, you know that it's a city full of mysticism and magic. Some people connect to it, some people don't. There's beautiful, beautiful artwork, and people are spunky and weird and hippie, and the views are gorgeous, and there's like a lot of wind and air. And so I like to tell people when I take them there that it's, you know, the 4 holy cities of Israel sort of divide up into the elements of the natural elements, and Tiberias is water and Tzfat is air. And therefore people who connect at Tzfat are a little bit airy. And so it doesn't have to be, but that's kind of my my philosophy. And I'll say that the story of Tzfat is about Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai, and the story goes, he's actually buried across the way from Tzfat. So I'll just open this picture. If you guys see this big hill right here, we're looking at the city of Tzfat, and across the city of Tzfat is Meron, Mount Meron, which you might know because every year on Lag BaOmer, which is a few weeks after we start counting the Omer, so a few weeks after Passover is over, Jews from all over the country will like come and gather at Mount Meron and do a really, really big, basically, celebration. A very, very big bonfire and dancing and singing. And basically that is to commemorate Rabbi Akiva and his students. There's a story that says that Rabbi Akiva and his students, basically the students sinned, and on Lag BaOmer, we're celebrating the fact that they, you know, were healed because they all got very, very sick and ill, and many of them died. And so the celebration of Lag BaOmer is to sort of remember, or not remember, but like memorialize the fact that some of them did survive, and then they did tshuva, right? They were forgiven basically. But moreover, Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai, who is the focus of our story today, he's buried there. That's what people say. And his story is that he actually ran away from Jerusalem after the destruction of the Second Temple with his son, and he hid up in the Galilee somewhere. And he was wandering around, and he was hiding from the Romans, and he ended up meeting a Jewish person one day when he was out of his hiding spot, and he realized that this Jewish person, this Jewish Galilean, he's not studying Torah, he's not sitting and studying, and he's not learning, and he's not thinking about God, and he's not doing all these things. And so Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai, he's coming from Judea, he's a rabbi, he's coming from a whole world of only Torah and only Jerusalem and only the temple, and he gets very angry. And he gets very frustrated by the fact that a Jew farming? Why is a Jew farming? Why are you wasting your time? And he gets very angry, and God punishes him and sends him and his son into a cave for 12 years. And finally, after these, you know, this is a tale, obviously, but it's an important one. And after he's released, he meets another Jewish person who's working in the field, because you have to remember, right? The Jewish community who was living up in the north, they couldn't go to the temple every day. They couldn't go to Jerusalem every day. Their obligation was to only go 3 times a year. And so what did they do with the rest of their time? They farmed, because that's how they were going to survive, you know? And So Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai comes to him the second time and says, what are you doing? And it happened to be a Friday, and the guy was basically carrying two sheaves of wheat. And he says, what are you doing? And he said, oh, I'm on my way home for Shabbat. I'm done working. I finished my work in the field, and now I'm on my way home. And he said, oh, that's interesting. Why are you carrying two sheaves of wheat? And he said, oh, well, this is for Shabbat. One of these sheaves is for tonight, for Friday night, and one of them is for Shabbat, for Saturday, right? And then in that moment, Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai, who was so small-minded and thought in such a black and white way, he realized that these Jewish farmers, it wasn't they were sinners. It wasn't that they didn't care about their Judaism. It wasn't that they didn't care about God. It was actually they, even more so than the Jews living in Judea and during the temple time in Jerusalem, even more so they were practicing Judaism in a outside of the context, or outside of the of the context of the temple. Like they already had understood what it meant to be a person in the world, right? Work like a regular working person who needs to work the fields and needs to take care of the sheep and the cows, as well as maintaining their Jewish identity. So even back then, it was a whole conversation, right? Today we talk about it so often, especially in Israel, about people who don't serve in the army, people who do serve in the army, people who study all day and don't work, and people who do. And it's a conversation that we even have today about kind of how much of your life are you giving to your Jewish identity, and how much of your life are you actually living in the world with everybody else. And already back then, this was a theme. So Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai, he learns this lesson and he says, these people are amazing. And he realizes how small-minded he was. And he ends up, the story goes, is that he ends up being the first person to write the Kabbalah. And the Kabbalah, I think most of us know what it is, right? It's the spiritual foundation of mystical Judaism, basically. And if you've ever been to Tzfat, you probably know about the Kabbalah. You've probably learned about it. If I was in Tzfat with you today, I would take you to somebody called Avram Leventhal. He is an amazing, amazing artist, like many others in Tzfat. And he would, if we were sitting with him in his studio, what he would tell you or teach us is that he would tell us a little bit about Kabbalah and a little bit about kind of how all of the elements of the world have a connection, a spiritual connection to something in Judaism. And he would show us his various artwork of his, but he would specifically talk about the one that he's holding up in this picture, which I think it's amazing. He decided to take the tune of the shofar. So if we think back to just a few months ago, we had Rosh Hashanah and we had Yom Kippur, and we listened to the shofar, we heard the shofar, and the shofar blows, right? There's tkiya, right? And it had a sort of tune to it, right? It has a sort of rhythm and a specific way of doing it. And what he did was he actually took this rhythm and interpreted it through colors and through patterns. And you can see, he tells it best. I don't even know how to tell it, but you can see through his artwork is that that's what he was trying to recreate, these patterns and using these diverse colors of trying to imitate a visual version of what the shofar sounds like, which is so cool. He has a bunch of other stuff too. So if you're next time you're in Tzfat, when it's safe enough to go to Tzfat, I definitely recommend hanging out with him. And then, two other important things that I'll tell you about Tzfat is that somebody named Rabbi Yosef Karo, he lived in Tzfat, and he basically created something called the Shulchan Aruch, which today we use it until today. And the Shulchan Aruch, by the way, in Hebrew means set table. And basically it's taking all of the stories, right, from the Talmud, from the Mishnah, all of these stories that were written in the Galilee, right, and interpreting them in a way that's sort of like simple and functional. So today, if I wanted to know, I don't know, some rule about Shabbat, right, a specific rule about candle lighting on Shabbat, for example, I could open his book, open the Shulchan Aruch, and I would have an answer for my question in a very, very simplistic way. Because if we think about it, if you guys have ever been to any Jewish home or any synagogue, we all know that you walk in and there's a whole shelf of books and books and books and books and books, and the Jewish library is just humongous. And so what Yosef Karo did was say, let me make it easy on you. I'll simplify it in this book. And so we use it until today. One more thing about Tzfat that I think is really important, and it's going to connect to the next part of our story, is actually this synagogue. It's called Abu Hav Synagogue. It's a synagogue in Tzfat that the communities who started to be exiled from Spain moved to the land of Israel. Not everyone, a lot of them moved to the land of Israel. Actually, my ancestors, apparently, Safta can vouch for me, but my ancestors also were exiled from Spain. They did not come to the land of Israel. They went to Bulgaria. But some of them came to Tzfat, and it was a Sephardi community, right? Because the Jews in Spain were Sephardi, and they came to Tzfat, and they basically established a Sephardi community. And this is one really, really unique example of what a Sephardi synagogue looks like. Even till today, by the way, like the bima is in the center, it's on it's kind of risen up on a platform. The whole room is sort of like circular, as opposed to kind of what we're familiar with, which is the bima in the front and everyone sitting in rows facing. So it's a little bit different and diverse, and it's just an interesting expression of kind of, we automatically think about, oh, every Jew, prays the way we do, and every synagogue looks the same way our synagogue looks like. And when we go back in history and realize it was really different, some similarities, but obviously really different. Okay. Their next stop is a city called Pki'in. I don't think anyone probably on this call has been to Pki'in. I've actually only been there once. Pki'in, going back to the theme of our Zoom call, if you guys remember, the theme of our tour is, were the Jews really exiled from the land of Israel? So up until now, I think we could pretty safely say, no, we have a consistency here. In Pki'in, we have a synagogue. It's basically the only synagogue that we know of that has been open and has been continuously active since the destruction of the Second Temple and before, even all the way until 1948. Okay, why is this? How is this? There was a community, basically, they're called the Musta'arabim. Musta'arabim means the people who live with the Arabs or amongst the Arabs. Musta'arabim, and they were a very, very small community. But they were in Israel basically throughout the 2,000 years. So when people say, oh, well, Jews came from here and Jews came from there and they came back and we're returning to our land, it's very true. I mean, I wouldn't be blonde with blue eyes if that wasn't true. But there's a specific group of people who actually never left. And one of the remnants of their community is in Pki'in, this really, really unique synagogue. So I'll just show you the outside. This right here is a sign from the government, actually, that establishes officially or says officially that this synagogue was actually from the times of the Second Temple. And, they found the archaeological basis of the synagogue and that it's continuously been in use. And then this is what the inside of it looks like. The plastic chair is not included, obviously. So there's this woman, her name is Margalit Zinati, and her family was part of the Musta'arabim community. She today lives in Pki'in. She's one of the very, very few Jews who live there today. And she basically is responsible for the synagogue. So if you're ever in Israel, in the Galilee, and you want to do a day tour, or even half a day tour, and you're next to the city of Pki'in, you can call her up and go check out the synagogue. And again, it is the the only synagogue in the land of Israel that's been continuously active since the destruction of the Second Temple, which is just amazing. And today, just for reference, Pki'in, the city itself, mostly is resided by the Druze community, which I'll talk about soon, but a few Jews are still there. Okay, so that's Pki'in. We have 2 more stops on our road. I think we're pretty good on time. Yeah. So the next city I want to talk about is called Akko. Akko doesn't really have such a deep, significant Jewish community or Jewish history to it. I will talk about two different characters that I think are really interesting. One thing to sort of understand before we talk about the characters is that since the 7th century, when the Muslim conquest began in the land of Israel, that's really when we see Jewish communities and Jewish presence sort of become less and less. And there's a few reasons for it. A lot of Jews converted to Islam. So today, there's an idea that perhaps some of the Palestinians of today or some of the Arab Israelis of today were actually maybe once not so long ago Jews themselves, and they just converted to Islam. Probably some of the Jewish communities that were here left once the Arab conquest began, especially in the north, by the way. There's a lot of turmoil between the Crusaders and between the Islamic dynasties. And so it was probably a way to get out of the way, if you know what I mean. One of the people that I wanted to talk about, his name is Chaim Farhi, which is actually a pretty modern name if you think about it these days. He was the right-hand man to someone named Al-Jazar Pasha. Al-Jazar was basically the leader of the Galilee, the ruler of the Galilee during the Ottoman Empire. And his capital was Akko. And he was a very, very cruel man. So this is Chaim Farhi. So he never converted to Islam. He was a Jew through and through. And Al-Jazar Pasha, he knew that Chaim Farhi was a Jew, and he took him as his right-hand man. He's like, you Jewish people, you are so clever. You guys, you will help me with all of my big, complicated questions of life. And in fact, what happened was Napoleon came to try to conquer Akko, and he didn't succeed. And one of the stories is that Chaim Farhi ended up telling Al-Jazar how to create sort of a tactic to confuse Napoleon. This is what they did, and they ended up actually not surrendering the city to Napoleon, which was not true. It couldn't be said the same for Yaffo, because Yaffo was conquered by Napoleon, and Napoleon was on a quest to conquer the whole Middle East or the whole world. So Chaim Farhi actually saved Akko and kept it in the hands of the Ottomans. And this was also, just so we know, this is about the 18th century. One more person that I think is also really important to mention is the Ramban. Okay, this is his. Oh, it's not such a great picture. I'm sorry. This is his seal. Okay, the Ramban, he comes from Italy, from a city called Girona, and he basically flees from there to the land of Israel because of Christian conversion and persecution, or forced conversion and persecution, and he comes to the land of Israel. And he travels all over. He's in Akko and he's in Haifa, and he writes a lot about what he sees and what he experiences in Israel. And he actually, till today, there's a synagogue in the city of Akko that is named after the Ramban. So those are the two significant, I would say, Jewish representatives of the city of Akko. Other than that, it's a city full of Crusader history and archaeology, as well as Ottoman amazing, beautiful structures. And if you haven't been to Akko, definitely recommend it. It's one of the most pretty places in Israel, I think. Okay, and we finally reached our last destination, the city of Haifa. So I'll say a few things about just some numbers in Haifa, like who lives here, what the history of it is, the modern history of Haifa, and then a little bit of just about like my life, because I live in the Carmel, which is pretty close to Haifa. So Haifa does have a history, like an ancient history, but I'm going to focus right now just on the 20th century. The British and the French conquer the Middle East from the Ottomans in the early 20th century, and Haifa is decided by the British to be one of the centers of the land of Israel, or of the land of Palestine, we should say, the Palestine Mandate. And they build the Technion Institute, right? That started under the British mandate. The Baha'i Center, so the picture that we're looking at right now, I'll tell you a little bit more about the Baha'is in a minute, but that was established under the British mandate. The port itself, right? Haifa was planned to be, and really in many ways is, this big, huge, significant port city. It's not as important today as it once was, but still really important. They created an electric power station and all these other things that were really going to make Haifa this very sort of modern, forward-thinking city. And really good for the industry and the trade. Today Haifa is sort of considered like a mixed city, right? So we have tons of minorities who live in Haifa or in the area of Haifa. The city itself is about 82% Jewish, but 14% Christian and 4% Muslim. And then inside the city or around the city, we have a minority community of the Druze, a minority community of the Carmelites, of the Baha'is, of the Ahmadians, of the Bedouins. And so I'm going to tell you a little bit about those communities. and show you pictures of them. And I think that'll be our last thought of the day. So let's start with the Druze. The Druze community, it's a community that lives mostly in the north of Israel, in the Galilee and in the Golan Heights. They also live in Syria as well, and a few other places. But just some basic fundamental ideologies of who they are. They are Arab speaking and they're Arab by culture, but they are not Muslim. The Druze is a completely different religion. Some I guess major themes about their religion is that they are very, very loyal to whatever land they live on. So the Druze today actually serve in the IDF and are very Zionist, or I would say pro-Israel, and are very passionate about, having a successful, modern state, liberal, democratic, progressive state of Israel. And so they're some of our best allies. I'll just say, and you could ask questions about this afterwards if you want, but I actually live in a Druze village right now. It's a Druze village that I'm not the only Jewish person who lives here. There's a few other people who live here as well. But it's an amazing place to live because we're sort of embedded in their culture with their food, and when you drive around, you see all of these like Israeli flags with the Druze flags, which is, by the way, the picture here is the Druze flags with the Israeli flags, and it's everywhere basically, like very, very patriotic, which is a nice feeling in these times. So these are the Druze. And they primarily live in the Haifa area, also throughout the Galilee, but there's a lot of them who are specifically in this area. We have another community. This is also not such a great picture, I apologize, called the Ahmadians. They are Muslim, but they're a version of Islam that sort of believes that the Prophet Muhammad, he came, he went, and it ends there. Like they're not waiting for anyone to return. They're not waiting. They're not sort of running after any kind of like a jihadist goal. Like they believe that all of the prophets who came before, whether it's Muhammad, whether it's Jesus, whether it's Moses, they came, they went. We have to, take in their wisdom. But from here on out, their goals, their focus, their purpose is to try to spread peace and love, because they take the elements of peace and love that exist in the Quran and that exist in Islam and really put that in the forefront of what they believe in their faith. So they're also very kind of connected to being here in Israel, and I've met a bunch of them several times with groups, and their center is in Haifa, and they always talk about making peace. It's like a very big theme for them. This community is another community called the Carmelites. They live on the Carmel in Haifa as well, right? There's so many minority groups in Haifa, we don't even know. And they used to be basically Christian hermits, right? So they would live in these caves in the Carmel Mountain. And eventually they built a big church in Haifa, and they're not a really big community, but they live here, and they're basically devout Carmelites, which is a branch of Christianity. And one of the main things for them is the prophet Elijah. And the prophet Elijah, it says that he went up in a chariot, right, with fire, and it's in this region, right? So also them, and actually also the Druze, are very focused. The reason why their center is here actually is because of the story of Elijah and the history of the Carmel around that story. And then one more group we'll talk about for a minute is the Bedouins. So if you've been to Israel, you've probably maybe come across Bedouins once or twice. Typically, they're the communities who live down in the desert, and they have camels and they live in tents. But actually, some of the Bedouins live, in fact, also in the Galilee. Not too many, but there are. And some of them, most of the ones who choose to live down south, lead sort of half a modern life and half like a Bedouin tribal desert life, and the ones up north here have sort of decided to live a fully modern life. And so actually, in this Druze village that me and Dor live in, our neighborhood is actually Bedouin specifically, and most of the Bedouins who live in our area, they're actually people who fought alongside IDF soldiers in 1948, and who also declared sort of their patriotism to Israel, and still do. And many of them who live here actually serve full-time in either the police force or major officers in the IDF. One of the stories is that because they're sort of nomadic people, or they have nomadic roots. So one of the stories is that, or one of the connections, I guess I'll say, is that a lot of them are sent to units in the army that are really good at navigation in places that are hard to navigate in, if you understand what I mean, right? Because they're nomadic, so they understand how to kind of work and understand their surroundings in the land. Okay, so that's a few minutes about modern Haifa and modern Israel. I'll just say one more thing. This big picture here of the Baha'i Gardens. If you've been to Haifa, you've seen it. You've taken pictures in it. The Baha'i is a community. Actually, they're one of the fastest growing religions in the world, which is something that I just recently learned. And their center used to be in Akko, or is also in Akko, but it's primarily today in Haifa, where they have these gorgeous, gorgeous gardens. And this is their center. And so people come from all over the world to come visit the Baha'i Gardens. Baha'is don't really live in Israel, but their center is here because their leadership was imprisoned here. And so they sort of decided that the center was going to be here as well. And it's just one of the, I think, most telling symbols of the north, or of Haifa itself, that is, it sort of like screams that as to how multicultural and how accepting and how diverse the city actually is, and how it really has this like really broad, like very, very broad shoulders, very broad wings, sort of can hold all these different spaces and has room for all these different kinds of people, which I think is pretty amazing. And so to summarize, I want to say two things. Number one, today, hopefully you learned a little bit about the Jewish communities that lived here from the end of the destruction of the Second Temple, 70 CE, all the way up until today. And hopefully you understand a little bit better that really there was perhaps an exile of a certain group of people, but a major exile of a complete and total eradication of Jewish people in the land of Israel, there never was, because there was always a consistent Jewish presence in this land from the temple forward, and even before that, obviously. That's number one. Number two, just a personal thought that I wanted to share with you is that one of the things that I think a lot about, because I lived in Jerusalem for a long time and now I live up north. And one of the things that I think a lot about is why were communities so sort of, I don't want to say easily, but I'll use that word lightly, easily able to live together in more or less peaceful terms up north, right? We just went through essentially 2,000 years of history. And granted, there were battles and there were wars. I didn't go into them. But all in all, if you compare them to events that took place in Jerusalem, they don't compare when it comes to the bloodshed and the wars and the fighting over these like holy sites. And so one of the things that I think about a lot is, why is the north so different than Jerusalem? Like what makes it so different? What makes it so less fought over? What makes it so that people can actually live in a place like Haifa, where you have all of these minorities just living together day in, day out? And not to say that there aren't problems, there are for sure problems, but and I think this is my theory, right? I don't have an answer to this question, but one of the things that I think about is perhaps the fact that we don't have so much physical religious symbolism in such a tight space, right? Because Jerusalem, you can walk 2 meters and you'll have like 15 different religious historical places that you can talk for eons about, whether it's Islam, whether it's Christianity, whether it's Judaism. And in the north, I think, we don't necessarily have those visual or physical symbols like we do in Jerusalem. And in some ways, it makes it easier for people to just live and live the life of who they are and kind of do what they do. Anyway, so those are my thoughts. I hope you guys enjoyed. I hope it wasn't too fast. I did go through a lot, but I wanted to kind of give you a full overarching experience, and hopefully we can do this again for real sometime soon. Yeah. If there's any question, I can't hear you guys, so if there's any questions, you're welcome to ask me or type, or the person, whoever's running the show, can turn on the speaker.
Can you hear us now?
Yeah, I can hear. Mhm.
Okay, perfect. So I just wanted to say that you know there was a round of applause that you haven't heard. So let's do it once again. So that's number one. And the second thing is, as much as I was looking forward for the tour led by my brother, who's also a tour guide, you know, a month ago, I was particularly looking forward to the tour you led, because it so happens that the north is my favorite part of Israel for exactly for its diverse history, and you know the history that is like, oh, should say more peaceful. And I was, you know, and I think I agree with you. I think I agree with you that, you know, that the fact that it's like, you know, that the religious places don't overlap exactly one on top of the other helps to lead a more peaceful life. But I'm also wondering, and like I will leave you with it, if maybe it's because the geography of the north, it means that the north is small, but you know, the geography of the north consists of many small geographic regions, like, you know, the valleys and the mountains and so on, which means like, you know, the units are smaller, so each, you know, kind of everybody can get their own spot. Like, you know, if you want to live on a mountain and be, you know, a Druze, you're a mountain and live on a Druze. Like, if you want to be a Carmelite, you live on the other end of the mountain, so to say. If you want to live in the valley, you know, there is a valley. If you want to be a hippie living on a hill, Jewish hippie living on a hill, Sfat is there. Like, you know, like the geography of it makes it easier to like to create your own little piece of, you know, of your own world where you can be yourself. When you think about the rest of Israel, it's either one big, you know, south, you know, with the where the Bedouins were living, or like, you know, or the Judean mountains where the land is so scarce and the water is so scarce, so everybody lives where the water is, you know. So kind of like it's much more contested because there's less place for yourself, and the north is, you know, kind of like verdant and green and geographically diverse, and could be the reason for it. I don't know, just kind of my sense. Do you think, like, you know, it's something that, you know, makes sense at all?
Yeah, I definitely agree with that. I think you're definitely correct. And it makes me wonder also, as more and more people move up north and the north gets more populated, it makes me wonder kind of how, if that's going to change, how that's going to change. Yeah, and I think that the more, as we saw in the example of the synagogue, the more closer you live to communities that are sort of more different than you, you're also perhaps going to be more influenced by that. And so I think that those who want to sort of pick a hilltop and live far away and do their own thing, like you said, Monty, you can do that. You can definitely do that, and you can do the other, and you can live close by to people who are very, very different than you and be part of that world.
I think, you know, and I think I can share you with you the story that, like, you know, why among other things North is one of my favorite places. So first of all, my brother studied at the University of Haifa. So, like, you know, University of Haifa is a university where you regularly see, you know, Muslim nurses studying with, you know, Jewish nurses, and actually such a high, and Druze, and actually such a high percentage of the people who study at the University of Haifa are, you know, Muslim and Druze, and, you know, and Christian Arabs. So, like, you know, so University of Haifa is really kind of like Israel. I think Israel at its best, like its most diverse self. You know, that's one thing. And the other thing, one of my brother's best friends, for a very long time, used to run a place called Beit HaKehilot, which is the House of Communities, which was the LGBTQ plus center at the University of Haifa, and the LGBTQ plus center at the in the city of Haifa, by the Carmelite, was a place where, you know, you had a Druze, LGBTQ Druze group, and then you know, and a Christian Arabs group, and, like, you know, Russian speakers group, and, like, you know, and they had their own activities. But and then at the end of the day, there was like, come play board games, and you had, you know, whatever, a Druze lesbian playing whatever, you know, game they were playing, you know, Monopoly with, you know, with a Russian origin Jewish guy, you know, coming from one of the suburbs of Haifa. So I think, like, you know, like, I'm not saying that it's all you know, like rainbows and unicorns, but compared to the rest of the land, it definitely feels much more peaceful. And I hope, you know, there is also like an agenda for, you know, for the order of the trips. I hope also that the North, the way it is right now, becomes, hopefully kind of, the energy of the North is something that Israel will find a way to move forward, in a super difficult time, kind of united in its diversity, and Druze, Baha'i, Jews, and Christian Arabs kind of like coexisting together in the North, and being, creating Israel as a diverse state that proves, if you have been anywhere in Israel, it's not apartheid. But if you want to really know how diverse and beautiful Israel can be, I think a visit to the North is like the best proof how much Israel is not apartheid. Which is an accusation that is wielded against us these days. So I think there was kind of like the message that we wanted to finish on, that like that like the key to understand what Israel can be at its best is in the North.
But right now, you can go to the north because this morning there was alarms in Tzfat.
The voice is that that now you cannot go to the North because there are alarms in Tzfat. So we have a wish to you. We know it's late on your end, so we just want to have the wish for all.
Well, she's getting married. A mazel tov for a marriage.
Mazel, yay!
First of all, the mazel tov on your marriage. May we all be guided by you and your husband to be, and by my brother.
Ecuador.
For who? Where is
Sham, you want
Of course.
That's right. That's right.
Neshikot the door.
Okay, so Neshikot from Savta v'chibukim mechakihila, to Lador, and we wish you all the best, as a couple, and of course we're hoping to see you both soon and in Israel, not online, but be'artzeinu. So thank you so much for it.
You guys.
Or in California, as we were told, or in California, but for the sake of your parnasa, of your job in Israel.
Yes.
So thank you so much. Enjoy the rest of your evening and have a safe week ahead.
You did a wonderful job.
Thank you.
Thank you.
You guys are great. Thank you.
Good night.
Good night.
Good
Good
night.
night.
Good night.
Um,